I remember like the first time I gave a presentation like this in any audience, and it was right before lunch, and I quickly learned this is the worst slot you can have, and now we're running late, so we'll see how we do. I want to thank definitely hiding, Tristan and Ben in the corner there. If anything I say is remotely intelligent, it was their work. I'll own all the really dumb stuff. Okay. So I thought I would talk through a real example that some of you may have seen. The foundation had a pretty big announcement on May 8th, and it sort of had two components. One is that Bill Gates committed to spend $200 billion over the next 20 years, and that the foundation will be closing in 20 years. There was, as you can see, amazing press. I will tell you, we pulled some good headlines. There were definitely headlines that lost the 20 years part and did just the first two parts, which led to a lot of calls from grantees and also a call from my mom, panicked. So, one KPI. Within the announcement, we really wanted to highlight that the foundation over the next 20 years would be focusing on these three goals. No mom, child, or baby dies from preventable disease. The next generation grows up in a world without deadly infectious diseases, and hundreds of millions of people break free from poverty. These became, I mean, yes, these are the key messages. And so then we used quite a bit of this May 8th event and the press around it to drive that messaging. And it was sort of a kickoff to galvanize support, not just from the foundation, but public support to achieve these goals. And so it was the first in a years-long, I don't love this word, but campaign to build support for these foundational, pun intended, goals. And this announcement, hopefully fairly obviously to people, took place against some pretty strong headwinds, maybe one more obvious than the other. So headwind number one, this is data from something called the Development Engagement Lab. It is a grant from the foundation to two professors, Jennifer Hudson, David Hudson, University College London, University of Birmingham. But we could have pulled any number of different data, and I'm guessing this will not surprise you. Public support for funding for the types of things that we're talking about has been going down as funding is going down. And so, and just to say what I think hopefully is obvious, but maybe isn't, and isn't always as much as maybe we think, yes, the foundation is committed to spend $200 billion. That's a lot of money. It is a very small, like, we are, how do I want to say this? Government funding dwarfs what we can spend. And so public support for government funding is if we want to achieve these goals, the foundation will not achieve these goals alone. We cannot. And so this becomes one of the key levers to success. The other headwind, which is maybe less obvious, is that the foundation is actually not very well known. We like to say there's a lot of gray space here. The negatives are pretty low. I used to do political campaigns, like, we would love this. No candidate has this low negative ratings. But the positives are really low too. And we're just not very well known. And if you think about what we're trying to achieve, this is a second headwind we have to take on. Okay. And so we create basically a theory of change to organize the whole thing. And let me just stop again and back to like my first mentor. Only be good at something you want to be asked to do. This is my PowerPoint slide. I acknowledge how ugly it is. But the basic theory, and by the way, tons of data behind this, is that if people are aware that progress has happened, and by the way, progress has happened. The world has, COVID aside, the world is a much better place than it was 5, 10, 15, 50 years ago on all the things that we're trying to achieve. But if people are aware of that, and very few are, they become optimistic that progress can happen in the future. So to believe progress can happen, you have to believe progress has happened. And that once those two things happen, people start to be concerned about the issue, what we call issue salience. And all of that leads to increased support for a government role. Okay, so this is a basic theory of change, and that all of that is critical if we want to achieve these 3 North Stars over the next 20 years. But it gets, I mean, I know it's already complicated and not particularly attractive, but just when you thought it couldn't get more complicated and uglier, the Foundation's voice is part of this, because we need to help drive this change. And so we are trying to move people in these directions. We're trying to show these things and trying to achieve these goals. And we know that from a Foundation perspective, that, again, to fill that gray space, if we want to be trusted, if we want to be credible, there's certain key things that we need people to know, that we are part of that positive change, that the Foundation's grants over the previous 20 years, 25 years, have had an impact, that we work well with the communities where we're trying to make change, that we are, I mean, that we/Bill have positive motives, and that all of that builds familiarity and trust and credibility, and so you get this particularly unattractive theory of change that brings the two together. And what's important for us about orienting around this ugly theory of change is that it then allows us to align as an organization, both in terms of what we're going to do, but also what we're going to measure. And back to where we started, you know, I think some of the points that we got, so Travis's points about how we can be more effective and be more meaningful to the CCO. This is a big part of what has helped us. We have a new CCO, and speaking about bold, at one point we were working on this theory of change, and there was something different in there, and I just sent her some data, and she just like called people, and suddenly it changed. I was like, ooh, this is bold. Okay, we're in a different world now. This is good. We're responding to data. And so from this, we built a measurement plan. Dashboard-ish, but, you know, and the idea is these key metrics, awareness, optimism, salience, support, and then, you know, brand, familiarity, trust, and credibility. We don't expect to achieve the 3 North Stars. Can you have 3 North Stars? We have 3 North Stars in one event. So nobody is like saying, did you end poverty? That's like, no press conference is going to end poverty. So this is how we're tracking the event. So how'd we do? And before I get into the real metrics, I do want to say that we do love anecdotal data, so it wasn't just my mom. Tristan told me he was in a shop yesterday or the day before, and they asked where he worked, and they said, oh, I saw this big announcement, you're closing. So evidently the data tells the same story as the Vienna shopkeepers do. A lot of different sources in here, and nobody always has all of these different metrics, but we were able for this event to gather a bunch of different types of sources of information. And so this was the #1 Foundation news story since 2021. We're going to skip what happened in 2021 and just keep moving. And perhaps more importantly, 75% of that coverage was on message. It included those 3 North Stars. It included Foundation reputation drivers, all of those things, talked about impact, et cetera. And so when you look at awareness and understanding, and you look at the brand drivers, like one of the most successful moments that the foundation has had since we've started working on these things. You see a 14-point increase in optimism. And again, optimism is the sense that the world can get better. So that's a pretty significant, that's survey research, but so for what it's worth. And then, excuse me, a smaller, but a lift in issue salience. People saying that this was an issue that they were concerned about. And then a 14% in familiarity or just news recall. Like we saw a big jump. We do an open-ended question in surveys. It's just basically standard seen, read, heard about the foundation. And we saw a 14-point jump in that. That's a lot for us. We don't normally see something like that. And we have a follow-up. We do again, standard battery. Overwhelmingly, people who said they recalled seeing something positive. And then we ask an open end. And of course, a lot of open ends are, I think I saw in an earlier briefing that this was a room where we curse. So we get a lot of shit in those open ends, but apologies if I misread the room. In this case, we got pretty much a pretty good recall of like, actually they were aware of the event and they seemed to be processing some of the key messages. You know, we didn't get a verbatim. And then, you know, what did this lead to? We did see support for overseas development aid go up 3 points, not a lot, but still, given the headwinds, that would be a big change if that was the world we moved into, if we started moving in that direction. And a pretty significant 22 point increase in the trust and credibility of the foundation. So a lot of different sources there. And so, I mean, pretty successful event, but again, I want to go back to, you know, as I think about, and again, appreciated the questions, and again, I've worked a lot to hone these PowerPoint skills, so nobody will ever ask me to do this again. But what we have found is that the North Star really galvanized the whole, so externally, it was a galvanizing principle, but it also was galvanizing internally, and it allowed us to gain alignment not just on what the foundation is doing, but within communications and advocacy. And that allowed us to prioritize measurement and move away from, again, I appreciated the earlier discussion of the vanity metrics, of the 8 billion people, 8 billion unique visitors to our website, or whatever that metric is that we all see sometimes. And so the North Star really was critical for us to sort of allow focus and really deliver on these metrics. Then, you know, I think probably obvious to people in this room, but a little bit new to some of the people we were working with, that developing this theory of change and that really focusing on, okay, this is what we're trying to do with this campaign, with this communications, helped us align strategy and measurement, but also prioritize. And so that theory of change became quite critical. And you could see the people like sort of strategy planning the event. We worked really closely with them to make sure we were aligned and that we were delivering on that and we were measuring what we were actually trying to do. I think. Yeah. So I think that would be. Do we take questions now, Jana? Is that what you want to do? Yeah. Cool. Cool.
I'm sure there will be a few. Who would like to take the first question? Perfect, Bruce. We'll get you a mic so that the virtual attendees can hear. Here she comes, the lovely Molly Liston.
David, thank you very much, and I'm sure we all appreciate the work that the Gates Foundation is doing. Not to get too political about it, but where do you see the role of the foundation in terms of changing public perception about support for the very, very wonderful things you're doing at a time when it's being undermined by your very government and by administrations? And what should you do about that to maybe change that perception?
I'm assuming you was collective and not me personally. But
Yes. Sorry.
It's a totally fair question. We are limited, as you probably know, as a foundation in what we can and can't do. And we work very closely with our legal team to make sure we never cross that line. So we don't lobby, there's just very clear things. In our personal lives, that is canon. And by the way, this applies to myself, Ben, probably Tristan, I'm not sure, but all the way up to Bill. And so, but we can do things in our private lives. And so if you follow the news, you probably saw Bill is actively, I think I saw in the news, and Ben will tell me if I'm wrong, but he met with Secretary of State Rubio on Friday, I think it was. And so there is constant, it's a little different than what you said. So and I think it's a twin thing, right? So we are actively trying to engage with the administration, and not just in the US, in other countries that are have been historically big supporters of this sort of work. So we're definitely still having those meetings and trying to maintain the relationships and hopefully maintain the work as best we can. The role of the public is something that we think about a lot internally. And I think maybe what you're seeing here in an event like this, again, I started with the headwind slides for a reason. And we know what's happening. And so I think we definitely are trying to galvanize support for those three goals. And I would say, regardless of who's in power, is the way I would say it.
Great question.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Bruce.
Thank you for the question.
Other questions? Paul? Okay. False alarm on that question.
Stunned silence.
Tim Markline from the back of the room. Microphone incoming.
Use the mic this time. Curious, since this was kind of an abnormal event or an unusual event, what other things have moved the needle for you on some of the theory of change that you've been trying to drive? Is it other announcements, other events, other activities?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Fair question. I think we do see from all of the measurement that when we drive events, we can create, maybe not to the scale, obviously, but there's bigger events that we do around the UN General Assembly. We have this big event called Goalkeepers. And when we do that, not to the same scale, but we do see with more targeted audiences, we do see building support. We are, I think, part of what the theory of change that we're trying to get ourselves to be better at is to be more reactive and to try to take moments that we are not driving and build off them and use them and use them to show people what the opportunities are for this kind of work. We're trying to be, I really, I appreciated we spend, as some of you may have known, there was, I think the last time I was at one of these events was February 2020. Yeah, and since then the foundation had some fires to put out, and have been doing a lot of that. And so I appreciated being reminded earlier about the idea of we need to be doing more fire prevention, and we've been doing a lot of firefighting for the last 5 years. And I think hopefully what this event and the way we've planned the theories of change and all of that is an effort to move in that direction a little bit. But you didn't ask the question as criticism, but self-criticism is we've been doing a lot of firefighting and we have not prioritized the other. And I hope what this event is seen here and anywhere we talk about it is that step in that direction.
Great. We have time for one more question if anybody wants it. Paul Hender, who declined the first time, will now take the last question.
Thank you. It's because I was going to ask the first question, but I just want to extend on that, which is, are you thinking about? You mentioned audiences, and how are you thinking about them? So, with the chart you showed earlier on, which showed a big lump of grey in the middle, there are lots of people not knowing about the Gates Foundation, but also a group that probably are broadly supportive, but definitely a group that are very, not even skeptical, probably cynical around the motivations. Are you thinking separately about those audiences, or how are you bringing that
Yeah.
together?
So yes, we are, and we've done a fair amount of audience segmentation in a lot of different markets. And so what we showed you was sort of a aggregate of like 18 different markets. If I showed you Kenya, it would be different than if I showed you France, as an example. Yes, there is, those green audiences tend to be supportive and but often passive. And so if you think about like what the ask is for those green audiences, it's more just see if there are ways. It's a weird, like, I work at a very weird place. So like people are like, how's the fundraising going? It's like, great, we raised $200 billion last month. I mean, like, but it's not like we're asking people to give money. So the ask is a little bit different than that. And so how do we motivate these people who are supportive, often big fans of Bill, believe in the work? How do we get them to sort of be active in that way? Because we're not asking them to give us money. So that's a different audience. With that gray audience, it's more, there's a lot of people in that gray audience that we've identified who, if they knew what we were doing, would be wildly supportive, but they have no clue. And that's not their fault. They're busy. So we all face this. So how do we get them to be aware and to realize in a small part of their life they could do something to make a difference here? And there's a lot of internal debates internally. I'm sure you all have similar. The groups that are cynical and against us, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion internally. How much do we have to care about? Like, do you care? Do you want to try to convince them? Or do you just sort of say, look, it's whatever, 10%, and there's always going to be that. And so it's a discussion that's live constantly. And there's actually a very good colleague who, she and I debate this almost weekly about what we think we should be doing. So it's a great question. And just to say, the other part of it is, like, and again, many of you deal with this more than we do, but as a global organization, if you said, how do you answer that question in Nigeria, it would be vastly different than you said, how do you answer that in London? So, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you so much, David. I think that was an excellent presentation and another example of long spoons, right? You are taking and helping feed the rest of the people who are having similar experiences, and there are similar experiences. And hopefully you'll be around for the next day and a half so that you can meet with people. I think you're gonna be at the NFP table for lunch to share and commiserate and just be a wonderful addition to the community today. So thank you so much. A round of applause for David, please.